One of my missions with this podcast is to make memoir writing both transparent and accessible. And that's why today I want to pull back the curtain. We're going to talk about the philosophy behind my press, Page and Podium Press, as well as why we do things the way we do them. So today, let's get behind the scenes and talk about what is the Memoir Method. Stay tuned. Most memoirs don't stall because of lack of time. Most memoirs stall because of lack of clarity. And that's why I put together the Memoir Method checklist. The idea here is to give you every single step in the process, not because that makes it easy, of course not, but because no project is ever completed until you know what the steps in the process actually are. You can download it free at pageandpodium.com/checklist. I am so grateful to hear from those of you who have written in, left comments, just to note that the approach we use on this podcast is inspiring to you. I can tell you there is nothing that makes me happier than hearing that, because that really is the entire purpose. What we aim to do with the Page and Podium podcast is bring some of the philosophical approach that we share at the press to the public. So this podcast, as well as our accompanying blog that you can visit at pageandpodium.com/blog, are two of the ways that we get this public information out to you. It really is important to us that memoir writing, information about excellent memoir writing, training and inspiration for memoir writing is out there and available, and that everyone has access to very high quality support as they move forward through their book. So that is what we are doing on this podcast. But I realized recently that many of you all may not be familiar with what we do at the press. And it's important to me to share how that philosophy is something that we use on the ground at Page and Podium, as well as running behind the scenes in all of our podcast content. So, to first give you a little bit of context, if you are not familiar with Page and Podium Press, I founded this press a few years ago after I left the academy and decided to go full time into helping women write their memoirs. Now, part of this journey for me has been thinking about how I want to elevate folks, what is important about the journey, and really who I wanted to bring in, not only as part of my team, but also as my clients. So a lot of what we are doing in Page and Podium is really thinking about our philosophical perspective, really thinking about the work that we want to do out in the world, the change we want to make, and more importantly, how we want to go about making that change. What are the ethical and moral and cultural considerations that we want to make sure are embedded in everything we do? And part of that is 3 philosophical pairs. Now, these are pairs that we keep in balance during our work, but I also wanted to share our philosophical guidelines because this really is what goes into shaping the types of content that we share with y'all, as well as how we operate behind the scenes. So, jumping in, we have 3 philosophical pairs that we always try to keep in balance, both again within our staff and with the folks that we're working with as clients. So the first of those pairs is thinking about art versus craft. Now this first pair, like all of them, the important part about this is that we are keeping things in balance. Now oftentimes folks will have kind of an urge to pick a side. This is just the world that we are living in. And one thing that we really believe at Page and Podium is that balance is important in all things, and especially when it comes to how we think about the process. Now, when we think about art versus craft, this came from a bit of a debate that circulated among our staff for a while about whether it made more sense to think about memoir as art or whether it made more sense to think of memoir as craft. Now, if you have been listening to this podcast, you will not be surprised to hear where we landed, which was memoir is art and memoir is craft. And those two things actually need to work in harmony to really serve the process that both we and our clients are working through with every single book. Now, what do I mean by that? Now, when we think about memoir as art, what we're really getting at is this deep human need to express ourselves. This way that we approach the world as humans, wanting to share the things that we know, share our wisdom, share the experiences that we've been through. All of that, putting all of that into a human form that sparks recognition in someone else, that is art. Anytime you create something with yourself, create something that feels expressive in an authentic way, anytime you do that, the result is art. And that is something that I would never dispute. But where I get a little hung up on this is that often I find when we start thinking about things as solely art, we forget that there is a good amount of skill involved in getting something to come out as the type of art that you want it to come out as. Now, I tend to work with high-achieving women, people who have been very ambitious, often in education, career, even in family. And in that ambition, I find that there often is a mismatch between vision and skill. And here is where art and craft come in. On one hand, we do need to push ourselves to create, to express from an authentic place. In this world where everything's got to be commercial, you're not even allowed to have a hobby unless you monetize it, we know that we have to hold steady to ourselves and really make sure that the expression that's coming from us is coming from us. That has never been more important than now in this world of AI. We have got to be creating art in that very traditional way we think of art, as this expression that is shared between two people, as something that sparks that very human recognition. But the way we get to that piece of art, again, especially if you are someone who has very high standards for yourself, is we have to develop craft. Now, if we think about someone, for example, trying to throw a pot. I did this for the first time at a little workshop recently. I was not great at it. But really what is required in craft is some combination of just trying to throw that pot over and over and over, messing up, throwing away the clay, etc., and paired with someone who has done it before. And when we as new craftspeople are able to study under people who have a lot of experience, who have thrown those pots, who have shaped them into different things, that they really felt proud to share as their art, we can borrow some of that skill. Now, some, because of course, becoming a great craftsperson is never something that we can borrow from someone else. It always is something that we have to work through on our own. But to the balance of art versus craft, I really do find that when I work with folks on their memoir, these two things work to balance each other out. We are aiming for this very high standard, this art, this expression that we have to get out of ourselves. And through that desire, we push ourselves in the craft area and vice versa, right? As we're learning more about our craft, we have more vision for what our art could be. These two things feed each other. And at Page and Podium, we are always quick to emphasize that yes, memoir is art, but getting to the art that you're looking for is gonna require some craft. We need both of these things. Memoir is not either one alone, but it is both in balance. Okay, so the first philosophical dyad is art versus craft. And the second follows pretty immediately from that dyad. It is freedom versus constraint. Now, a few weeks ago, I did a whole episode on freedom versus constraint, so I don't want to belabor this point too much. But what I do want to say is when we think about freedom, freedom being something where we feel like we need to stretch our legs, we need to have total permission to do what it is we want to do, to say what it is we want to say, to write in the way we want to write. We do need that freedom. But at the same time, when we think of the craft piece of memoir, we really are thinking of making a series of choices that take us all the way from page 1 to the end of that book. And within every single page, we are making layers of choices. We are choosing what the structure of the overarching book will be. We are choosing what each chapter will represent. We are choosing the structure of that chapter. Within that chapter, we are choosing the sections and the paragraphs and the sentences and the words. And that is a lot of choices. And here's where constraint comes in. When we allow ourselves to have healthy constraints on our freedom, we actually allow ourselves to exercise that freedom much, much more effectively. Because we have made some choices, we have constrained ourselves, we limit the choices that we have to make down the line, which means we can make the remaining choices in a much, much more thoughtful manner. And of course, this feels even more like freedom than just simply having unlimited choices. So when we're thinking of freedom versus constraints, it is so important that we remember to keep those two things in balance. Often I find that we are fighting for freedom at times when we actually need to embrace constraints. We actually need to embrace some kind of structure, whether that is a narrative structure or a structure for our work time. And through those constraints, we also need to be pushing to make sure that we have got the freedom that we need to do the work we want to do. So we are always at Page and Podium balancing freedom and constraints. And the way that that looks practically on the ground, both for our clients that publish under our imprint and for the clients we coach and ghostwrite for, is we always want to make sure that we are balancing the freedom for you to work toward your vision, for you to hold forth what this book should be, what it could be, what it can be, and to hold that in some level of constraint to make sure that your book is cohesive, that everything works together, that the message is clear to your reader, and that you're able to reach that reader in the first place. So, freedom, constraints, we like to make sure that there is plenty of room for you to express who you are. At the same time, we have the experience to bring some constraints in and make that process feel better and move you forward to the product that you want. And the third philosophical dyad that we find so important, particularly when we're thinking about our coaching clients, is process versus product. Now, this one I think is pretty easy to see where I'm going. All we're thinking here is whether we are prioritizing the experience of writing that memoir over and against the product of the memoir. Now, I have already said in this video, and I say all the time, the women that we work with have very high standards for themselves. We are working with people who really are wanting an exceptionally strong manuscript. And many times what that looks like is, what I mentioned earlier, a little bit of a feeling of frustration that the skill level doesn't quite match the vision. And here is where the balance of product and process comes in. When we're thinking about the product, of course, you want an exceptional memoir. We want excellence in our work. There would be nothing worse than spending a year working on this memoir only to realize that the thing you came out with isn't even something you like or are proud of. Absolutely not. We do not want that for you. We want an excellent memoir. And at the same time, we know, because we have worked with dozens of women, we know that you can have an excellent product and either have a terrible time working on it or a really great experience. And why, then, would we not choose to have the really great experience? What this one comes down to for me is that we have to always be pushing ourselves, and oftentimes, as high-achieving women, we really only push ourselves in one direction. We really only push ourselves toward the best product. But OMG, y'all, we have got to give ourselves space to experience the process, because this process of writing a memoir, it can change your life if you let it. I'm going to give you a couple specific examples of how I have seen that happen in our group program as we get down to the end of this video, but let me just start by saying, I think everyone that sets out to write a memoir knows full well that they can embrace that, and that if they do, it will be a profoundly healing journey. And y'all, it is. But the best part about it is that when you let it be a good experience, when you let it be kind of fun, when you let it be exciting, when you engage yourself and really reflect, not only will you have a better process, oftentimes you'll have a better product. So these two things, just like the other dyads, really need to work in balance. They really need to be in harmony with one another so that we are not just falling into the rut of pushing for better product, but that we also are reminding ourselves that one of the routes to that better product is enjoying the process. So we've got to keep those in balance. Now, everything that we do at Page and Podium is really driven by the balance of those three dyads: art versus craft, freedom versus constraint, and process versus product. And all of those three not only feed against one another, but also with each other, so that we are getting a really holistic sense of how to move through this memoir writing process, even and especially if you have never done anything like this before. Now, I want to move into this next section with those three dyads in mind, because really, as all of the things that are Page and Podium came to be, they were all filtering through the lens of those dyads, even as we were debating and discussing them along the way to really make sure that we were dialed in on what our ethical social compass would be. And as we talked about this, one of the things that really came out of the mix was that when people are writing their first memoirs, there is a very specific combination of support elements that make or break the process. Now, before I get into what those elements are, I want to give a little behind the scenes, as promised, and talk a little bit about my right hand in the Memoir Method. Now, since the founding of our group program, the Memoir Method, I have had the amazing Emily Thrash. Now, Emily had come into Page and Podium first as an editor and later as a ghostwriter. And as she and I talked about the things that we were seeing in our clients, we started to notice a lot of repetition, a lot of pattern. And this was where we came up with these three areas of support, both that we had seen our clients need and that we had experienced as needs ourselves, even though we were writing pretty different things. So, okay, let's get into the three areas of support here. Now, these are areas of support that I've talked about in other videos. They are things that you can replicate, but with the Memoir Method, we wanted to put them all together so that folks could have a one-stop shop instead of trying to go all over the internet and compile the things that you need from all different places. It can be a little bit chaotic and sometimes not the best approach. Okay, so the first of the areas of support that is absolutely crucial is the education component. Now, both Emily and I had many years of teaching experience before we came into teaching our group program. I was teaching at the University of Memphis. Emily continues to teach at Southern New Hampshire, and both of us had taught in a variety of other contexts as well. So this was something that we had done a lot. But one of the things that we really wanted to do with the Memoir Method is not just teach the same old stuff that we had learned, the same old stuff that we saw taught all over the internet. We wanted to think about if we really zoom out on the whole body of knowledge about how first-time writers approach their own story. What are the things that someone must know? What are, in other words, the constraints that allow someone to begin to work in the craft of memoir as they develop those skills? What's the baseline? Well, of course, as you have heard me say, as you have probably heard elsewhere, it's gotta be structure. The thing that separates a really excellent memoir, even just a readable memoir, from one that will not go anywhere is structure. And what we found was when we distilled down all of the various ways that folks approach this structure question, we were able to pull out a pretty simple structure that allows folks to plug in major turning points while keeping the rest of the vision and the message as they had envisioned it. In other words, we are giving you just enough constraint that we are enabling that freedom. We're giving you just enough of a head start on the craft part so that you can start working on the art. And what we find is by keeping that structure both very simple and very accessible and approachable, we are able to give folks the scaffold that they need to get going. Now, if you have been struggling to move forward, I hope you will hear me say this. Sometimes you don't need to know everything. You just need to know a couple of the main points. And this is what I find is so often the case with our clients. I talk to people who are down a rabbit hole, watching all of the different YouTube videos, listening to all the podcasts, reading all the books, and you end up more confused than you were to begin with. So instead, the Memoir Method is driven by our experience working with first-time authors and seeing that we have got a balance between all the information and no information. One of the things that we do in the Memoir Method then is start with the structure. But of course, you do need a little more than that. So the way that we have structured this program is that in the first part, you move through a 7-step development process. Now, this is meant to help you figure out your topic, figure out your message, determine where your memoir begins and ends. All of this, by the way, with worksheets that will take you through the process. And finally, you will culminate with a detailed outline. Now, this is not only the type of outline that you will need if you decide you want to try for a traditional book deal, it is also an outline that others can read and evaluate for you. And as part of our development process, both Emily and I look over all of our TMM members' outlines and give them detailed feedback. So, as part of the education process, we first take you through the development, and from there, we have learn as you go modules on writing chapters, on revising your memoir, on marketing, and on publishing. So you really are getting the entire start to finish care plan, how you are going to move forward and make sure that this book is beautiful, that the product is excellent, but also that the process is enjoyable because you have the education you need at your fingertips. Now, I did want to clarify because I do sometimes hear from folks who would call the Memoir Method a course. And I get that. That doesn't bother me at all, other than to say, I do want to point out all of the education pieces are available on demand. So this is not a course in that you have to attend weekly to get the information. Rather, we have this structured as what's called a flipped classroom. If you're not familiar with that terminology, that is simply the style of pedagogy where the information is given to the students beforehand, and then when the class gathers, that's a time for more in-depth discussion. It's a time for questions. It's a time for application. So that's really what we're doing with our program. The educational components are all available to you on demand, but then you also have support from both Emily and I to really implement and apply the things that you're learning. So the education piece is really meant to take you forward, to allow you to move forward, to give you both the constraints and the craft skills that you need to really be successful. Now, the second piece is accountability. And y'all, I know we all really want to figure out ways to get accountability without really having to commit. But unfortunately, I do find that there is a major, major difference in my clients when they have real accountability. Now, I do one-on-one coaching, so does Emily. And as part of that, we do have folks send in their writing for the week. We mark it up, send it back to you, so week after week you have that support. But within the group program, I've actually learned something that surprised me a little bit. And that is that you do not need to be submitting pages to have that accountability. What I see week after week is that our group members either join on the call or join in with the email component that happens at the end of the week. And either way, no one wants to disappoint their teachers. Now, I'm putting that in huge scare quotes because we don't really think of ourselves that way. But I have had enough clients explain to me that the education system, that level of graded accountability, really works to hold them accountable. You know what? I'm not going to fight it. So what I see week after week is just having to come into the call, just having to reply to the Friday accountability check-in and say what you have done is a powerful way to keep your project moving forward. So we do offer those two mechanisms of accountability, both with the weekly group call and with the weekly email check-in that you have directly with Emily, just to let her know how you are doing. Okay, and the third piece, last but certainly not least, is community. Now, this is a piece that I know is not necessarily popular around the internet or with writers in general, and I think it's such a shame. Oftentimes, our culture will give us this myth of the lone writer sitting in the isolated place. Why is it The Shining in my mind? No idea. But we will be trying to work on these projects in isolation, even though every experience I have ever had has shown me the power of writing in community. Now, I have been writing in community for over 20 years, actually. I have long been a proponent of organizing get-togethers with other people who are working on writing, where you just simply take your laptop and sit there and write. And I think that type of community, a writing retreat or a writing group, can be amazing. But in the Memoir Method, we wanted to dial it up just a touch. So in addition to seeing everybody weekly in our check-in calls, we also wanted to make sure that there were other places where the community could come together. So for instance, many people connect with others through the Memoir Method app that is available both to current members and alumni. But we also have monthly gatherings, both a voice workshop where we get together and read samples of work to get a critique, to get some feedback, and our monthly book club. Your first session, by the way, is free. And if you're interested in joining us to hear Emily talk through some of the ways that popular memoirs work, what's going on behind the scenes in some of these bestsellers, go over to pageandpodium.com/book club. You can sign up to get our alerts and know what the next book we're reading. Jump on board for your free call, and we would love to see you there. Suffice it to say, for our conversation here, having community around you is not only helpful for the accountability piece, there is something magical about knowing that you are sharing a goal with others that you are in proximity to, whether that's physical proximity or through the magic of the internet, digital proximity. So when I talk about community, I'm really meaning much, much more than people to hold you accountable. We really are thinking about sharing our experiences. We're thinking about letting people know, hey, I was there before, I got through it, you're gonna be fine. Or asking on the other hand, hey, what did y'all feel when you went through this part of the process? That piece is so, so valuable. And having a group of people around you who share your perspective and who are in this same journey with you, that is priceless, y'all. So that rounds out our 3 support pieces with education, accountability, and community. And finally, I wanted to wrap this video just by briefly talking through some of the results that you can expect if you are moving through with this type of approach, whether that's with Page and Podium or if you've decided to put something together on your own. So there's a few different types of results. The first, of course, is just an excellent finished manuscript and book. And here I wanted to shout out Hope Fabilier. Now, Hope is signed on officially to publish her excellent memoir under the Page and Podium imprint. And I am so, so, so proud of the work that she has done on this book. I will tell you, when I first spoke to Hope, however long ago that was, the very first time we talked, she said, I have tried to write this memoir and I cannot get beyond 3 pages. How do people write a whole book? Well, y'all, she wrote a whole book. The answer to that question, how do people write a whole book? The answer is education, accountability, and community. And once Hope had the structures that we provide in the Memoir Method, she had no problem at all getting that memoir to come together. And I'll tell you what, I was just weeping at parts when I was reading this book. It is so moving. It is such an important commentary on what identity means, how identity links us to places nationally, how identity links us to other people. It's a beautiful book, and I cannot wait for y'all to read it. Suffice it to say right now, one of the results that you can get from consistently applying these tools is an exceptional finished manuscript. And if you have an exceptional finished manuscript, you will not have trouble finding a publisher. So, all right, first thing, an excellent finished manuscript. The second thing that you can expect to experience, remember, I was talking about product versus process. I am, of course, going to balance these for you here. The second thing you can expect is a profound healing journey. Now, we work with people in the program, both who have horrific trauma that they are writing about, and who are writing about something that's a little more fun, a little more engaging, something that was difficult, but maybe that doesn't have the weight of some of the larger kind of capital T traumas. It does not matter. No matter who you are, moving through the process of reflecting on a slice of your own life is going to change the way you see that slice of your life. And guess what happens? When we start to change the way we see parts of our lives, we start to change the way we see our lives. And when we start to change the way we see our lives, we start to change the way we see ourselves. And y'all, this is powerful. I want to shout out one of our former clients, Dolores here, who wrote into me recently after she had just gotten her manuscript back from a copy editor. All cleaned up, all ready to go, all ready to publish. Now, she sent me an email just thanking me for the team's work. And what she said was, she used to sit and think about the things in her book, and she used to cry. It used to be all tears, is what she said. She is now able to look at the pages of that book. She read the whole thing many times, as you do when you are publishing a book. And after it was in that final form, she found that reading through that book, not even a manuscript anymore, she could read through it without crying. And in fact, she read through it with such a sense of pride and groundedness, such a sense that she finally understood. It's profound. I love an excellent book, y'all, but that is the result that touches my heart. And I'll tell you what, that's the same experience I've had with my memoir. It's the same experience I have seen over and over. Doing this thing is going to get you more than you think. And one of the things it's going to get you is a profoundly healing experience. Okay, and then the third thing that you can expect as you go through this process is that you can expect to have it move you forward to the next thing. Now, I know y'all have different types of goals. Everybody has a different vision for where they want their book to take them. But I wanted to make sure that I mentioned this because it is something that I hear a lot, kind of in a little whispered afterthought sometimes, and I want y'all to shout it from the rooftops. Okay, so oftentimes women will come to me and say, I really want to write this memoir. I want it to be excellent. I know it could be healing for me, but I actually also really wonder whether maybe there's a career for me here. I wonder whether maybe writing will be a big part of my next journey. I wonder whether I could be out there speaking. I wonder if I could help people with this message. And y'all, yes, you can. You can do all of those things because the secret part that happens when you're writing a memoir is not only are you putting that one story into perspective, you are also gathering nuggets of knowledge all the way through the process. And one of the most magical things that happens when you write any book, memoir or anything, is that you will come out of that process with such a clearer sense of what you were trying to say. There is something life-changing about having yourself get that onto the page, revise it, change it, tweak it, dial it up, that is going to equip you so well to move forward into whatever new type of life you're imagining. And here I want to shout out Jaylee because I have never seen anyone hit the ground running so fast as she has. Now, Jaylee's excellent memoir is about opening her marriage and the things that she talks about in terms of gender, in terms of empowerment, in terms of modern sexuality, in terms of relationships. Y'all, some of this stuff blows my mind. And I am so happy to be able to follow along with her because she is doing some excellent thought leadership work. Now, I want to point you toward her Instagram, Fluidity Memoir, so you can check out her stuff there. You can sign up for her newsletter, which again is excellent. But the point that I want to make here is that when you are building up the momentum of writing that book, when you are gaining the confidence from moving through this work, you really will start to see things as possibilities that you didn't before. So I want to really invite you, as you are embarking on this memoir journey, to dream really big. And yep, a book deal, that is a big dream. But here's the point I want to make with this third section of results. When you really think about what you want, it might be a book deal. It's usually what you think you'll get from the book deal. So what is that? Dream big for that. Envision what that could look like, because I see people do this every single day, and you can too. Okay, so I have talked a lot today about not only the Memoir Method, our group program, but also about all the philosophy that goes behind it and some of the results that I see folks getting. If you are hearing this and thinking, oh my gosh, I think I might be a fit for this, or could this be the thing that moves the needle forward? The first step is just having a little chat with me about it. You can head over to pageandpodium.com/contact. It'll ask you a few questions about the book you're thinking of writing, and you can also book a time to speak with me. I really, really love this time, y'all, because I love to hear from y'all. I love to hear what your books are about. I love to hear what's going well. I'd love to actually hear where you're stuck so I can help you get unstuck. So book that time. I really can't wait to meet you and hear about your book. And until then, happy writing. Most memoirs don't fail for lack of time. They fail for lack of clarity, because their author is trying to move forward in a process that is unfamiliar and unclear with no one to support their efforts. And that's why I put together something very practical, the Memoir Method checklist. This is designed to give you every single step in the process, so you not only know what you need to work on now, you know what's coming next, and after that, until you have that beautiful published book in your hands. You can download it now at pageandpodium.com/checklist.